Good morning, everybody. As you probably heard from the introduction, I haven't been in Australia very long. In fact, I would say just under a week ago, I was scraping the ice from the windshield of my car just outside Brussels. So I hope you'll have some sympathy for me for the climate shock. On the other hand, too, please don't feel reticent in interrupting me during the course of the presentation. For a start, I have my rather characteristic Pommy accent. Please, if it's incomprehensible, interrupt. And I hope that's loud enough. Good quality? Great. Okay. My brief is to give you a talk on a view from the inside of the EU. I'm going to address this in, hopefully, 4 different ways. Starting off with, I'm afraid, a little bit of a repeat of what we've heard this morning. So we're going to skip through that rather fast. On the other hand, you may notice some material in the slides that could be useful, and of course, feel free to make use of that in your classrooms and subsequently. So the first part, the EU Force for Peace, that's, as I say, well covered. But then I'd like to go a little bit more into detail of how the institutions of the EU work. I'll go to maybe the next level down in the onion as to the detail of how we actually do work. Then, and I think it may be of some interest to the audience here, but also maybe a bit more specific, I'll look at a worked example, so that of education policy, which is my own Directorate General, as mentioned, education and culture. And I'll try to explain a little bit of how we run, for instance, the new generation of education programs. I'll immediately plug in for that now. As of the 1st of January, the programs which have been referred to, such as Erasmus Mundus, no longer exist. We have now an all-embracing flagship program called Erasmus Plus. And I'd like to go into some detail on that because I think that could be of interest. It's now a revamped program with a 40% more budget and a rather larger global outreach. So we'll do that. I think I can stand free of this thing now. So this we need to go into, you've seen this already very well earlier. It's these various phases of enlargement of the EU. It's relevant because I think it's important to understand the size of the problem we've had. You have all these various countries, very different in nature, very different in terms of geographical regions, from the north of Europe with its climatic specificities, and of course the large agricultural zones of Spain and France. And indeed, countries coming from a variety of political backgrounds, or regular monarchies, democracies, totalitarian, semi-totalitarian situations. It's interesting to see the evolution just sweeping across graphically as you see the size of the EU expanding. These are the various enlargements we saw already. I mentioned also a little micro-enlargement of East Germany was incorporated into the Bundesrepublik in 1990. Terminating, of course, now the current situation where we have the 28 states including Croatia. But looking forward also, because this is relevant, where are we heading next in enlargement? This is, I think, a fairly up-to-date status of the new, so we say, accession or pre-accession states, so countries in which talks are ongoing. There are a variety of technical terms for the various conditions of accession and pre-accession. But these are basically the ones who are, say, on the benches and with whom discussions are ongoing. Famously, Turkey has been ongoing since, I think, back in the 1980s, and is still stuck for various reasons. It's very interesting to note, too, the size of problems that we face in the different GDPs per capita, which compare quite strangely or unfavorably even with the average of the European Union. Only one, Iceland, which is, to all intents and purposes, now frozen, because they withdrawn their application, is of the same order of magnitude as the EU. The rest are substantially, poorer. On the other hand, the populations are relatively small, with the exception again of Turkey, which is a massive impact. That's just to show you the size of the problem, and we very much inverted commas. And of course, I think you've seen this already. This is the current status of the EU, and showing also the potential new accession states, in particular Turkey. And this is relevant, I think, because you can see the various war zones, which were recent problems we've had in the Balkans, and of course a region which I don't need to draw to the attention of the Australian and New Zealand audience around the Dardanelles. These are potential hotspots, and as they are more and more integrated within a bloc, of course the threat of conflict diminishes. How? Well, again, still on the size of the problem, we have the issue of the 24 languages. No need to go into them in particular, but just to point out that sometimes these stresses are intense, and I'll come to that when we talk about working on a day-to-day basis. Many languages, you find most officials are competent in 2, 3, even 4 languages, but there are some which are very peripheral and very hard to have competence in, particularly Hungarian, Finnish, Estonian, now Croatian as well. It's really quite dissimilar languages to the usual ones. These, I think, I'll give you 2 graphics here, which could be quite useful to refer to. It shows again, don't look at the actual numbers, but it's simply the range of just the surface area of the states, from France, which is huge, down to tiny Malta or Luxembourg and Cyprus. Similarly, the population, again, you've seen this, but it's nice to see this graphically. The range of countries we need, it's very hard to find a one-size-fits-all approach to all the states. And that's why I think we never will have a total one-size-fits-all approach. Again, okay. Tiny Malta up to quite substantial Germany. So the tools we've been using to bring together this grouping and to try to reduce this level of potential stress after the 2 European wars. No need to go through the details. This is a quick summary chart of the various treaties. You may find it useful. We start with Paris, of course, at the beginning, and the Treaty of Rome. I think the first 2 are particularly important, and it is very increasingly important to remember, as has now been pointed out this morning, but we tend to forget nowadays in the press and even in Brussels, that they were founded in the aftermath, the immediate aftermath of the conflict. And I think this is something you could really outline to your pupils, that the foundations were anti-conflictual, attempt to reduce the combative stresses and to try to rebuild shattered Europe. Subsequent treaties and acts increasingly emphasize the economic aspects. And that's what we are now. On breadth, the soundbite is it's not all about scraping bananas in Europe. Initially, it really was about the lowest level of the Maslow pyramid, reducing conflictual stress. Another key instrument that was introduced, I don't think we mentioned this, was the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights, which started to actually articulate the issue of dignity, the freedoms of the single market, universal equality, solidarity, citizens' rights, and justice, the basis of justice and home affairs. Important.
Simon?
Hello, yeah.
Sorry, back on the Charter. So do all countries in the EU have to follow that if they're going to be EU member?
Yes, they do. It's binding for the EU.
So could they be expelled if, say, like some president started killing off his people, kind of thing?
Well, this is tricky when you get someone who starts to flout the rules. What do you do? It's largely, I'd say, peer pressure is the simple way of putting it. Member states are often, well, we can go through the actual legal mechanisms, but when directives or regulations are issued to the member states, they are required to comply. But very often the compliance may not be immediate. Remember, this idea of kicking the can down the road occurs quite often. It's inconvenient for a state in its current political situation. They may postpone the implementation. But usually it is talked over, and that's the whole point. Everything is discussed and talked. You very rarely get a member state who just says, nah, not going to do it. Because normally you will not arrive at that position, because the process of arriving at these decisions, be they regulations, directives, decisions, has already taken place in a consensual and progressive manner. So, in a sense, the question should never really arise. If it does, it often reflects a change in regime in a member state, and you fudge around it in the sense of usually playing for time. But once such a decision has been arrived at, it should be binding to all member states. I hope that's
No, it's good. Thank you.
Maybe just,
yeah,
just to add, this is absolutely correct. What we usually
Sorry.
we usually then talk about this, we talk about over, but there is also the atomic weapon available to you, which is also to the institutions. We have currencies, one is money, but the other one is voting. And there is the possibility of suspending voting rights of the member state in the council. It's not happening, that's why I say it's not practical, but there is. People know the rules, so there is in the back of your mind what could happen to you. It might not strike you as a drama if you cannot vote, but that is basically withdrawing your way of influence in the union. And I think this has, we had situations with some of the member states where it clearly did have an impact after all.
Yeah. And sorry, so I think I've heard somewhere that ordinary Germans, say there's 80 million of them, do get a little bit peeved off when like smaller members have more of a say, or seem to have the equal amount of say as the German, even there's more of them. Is that a big problem?
Well, they don't have an equal say. That's the other thing. There are, depending on the voting mechanism in application, it is essentially demographically weighted. We'll come up to that in a moment briefly. When I flash through the Parliament slide, you'll see the voting rights which are allocated. So that's a kind of check and balance. And then with the qualified majority voting system, which applies to many decisions, it's a mechanism to try to prevent a bloc establishing itself. So this is really getting down to nuts and bolts.
Thank you.
Moving on. Very important mechanism, I think, also for trying to solder this grouping of countries together are the mechanisms we use for supporting in the weaker regions of the Union. So the regional fund, social fund, cohesion fund. It's one of the major expense items of the EU. And of course, this tries to reduce some of those social tensions which are being referred to of the poorer regions feeling a bit left aside. Now, for instance, you can already see that we refer to Scotland as a region there. It does benefit. So they are benefiting from their membership of the EU. If they were to secede from the United Kingdom, they'd have to reapply. And it's not the level that they get so easily. That's another story. You can see also the other, evidently somewhat poorer regions, the original core four, Portugal, Spain, and some part of Italy. It's regional, not by state notice, and of course Greece. This, I think, is actually quite important not to forget too. Another, I'm not a historian, but I'm sure there are plenty here. We recognise that when you have inflation or hyperinflation, that can tend to be a terrific social division and potentially conflict situation. This is the record of the inflation levels under back since the 1970s. You probably can't read this. It goes from 1970 up to 2012, and there has been a gradual tendency. Lots of bumps, including the big bump in 2008, 2009. But there's a tendency for inflation to be kept under control. That's by primarily the European Central Bank. And of course, the mechanism, one of the mechanisms used there is the gradual integration into the euro, which all new member states will run through. Now, the concentration test. Can anybody tell me what's wrong with that graphic? I actually grabbed this from the last moment and didn't have an opportunity to get to make events.
Is it Latvia's not joined?
Thank you very much. 5 points for that man. Actually, there is even a subtler, you could even have got another 5 points to spot the second point, which is we just re-signed the €10 note. So there's going to be a slightly new variation of that. But indeed, Latvia is incorrectly marked. It's not euro. Another thing, I think it's not strictly an EU policy in the sense that Schengen applies outside the European Union. We have members of this rather wonderful arrangement of borders transfer people for the majority of the EU. It includes up to, for instance, Switzerland is already in there, and the other, in fact, all members of the European Free Trade Association. So it goes beyond the EU. This, I think, is quite a powerful piece of glue, too. If you can move easily between the countries, you tend to regard them as your neighbour rather than something foreign. But we kind of claim it as well. And of course, the institutions or the instances within the institutions looking after our interaction with the World Trade Organization, our common foreign security policy introduced by latter treaties, and a very powerful development assistance and humanitarian aid initiative. We're a very major donor to the Euro Aid Development Corporation. And this tends to also benefit some of the poorer neighborhood regions and again keep the tensions under control. All of which briefly added up to the award of the Nobel Prize in 2012. And just a small personal note on this point. Actually, this photo is taken from outside my office in Brussels. I found it a bit ugly, but now I suddenly realise that there's a lot of relevance to this. And I can relate to this. As maybe many in the room, my grandfather was a medical warden in the First World War. So this kept us well informed as youngsters of the horrors of that particular campaign. And he involved us regularly going to Belgium for him to check out the war graves, and that's probably one of the reasons I eventually ended up in Belgium, subsequently worked with the European Commission. So end of personal. Now I want to move on to another, the more relevant part of the presentation. The graphic is perhaps a little bit unusual or meant to be a bit controversial. It's my opinion somewhat of the nature of the institutions. The American Space Shuttle is a very odd beast. It's an assemblage of some very complex and very inhomogeneous systems, each of which has a clear set of responsibilities. They are clearly very, very different. It's not at all the way you would design things if you were able to start from scratch. And the way they do things work, because it does work, is by a very intricate and complicated set of protocols and procedures, which we'll go to in a moment. But basically it works. So that's just I just offer you that image to hold on to if you really find it useful. Again, this puts it all on plain paper in the institutions. We won't go into those now. Just to point out, these are the major components of the institutions. Obviously, we tend to hear mostly about this layer and the European Council, its head of state association. Just to point out, too, these things called the agencies. That's a very dynamic area. Each time you look, there's a new one. We're tending to increase both in the area of the regulatory agencies, and even this a new system called executive agencies, which is a way we get a lot of business done now inside European. We'll forget about these because very shortly these names will no longer be relevant because we are in a period, an election year for most of these roles. We will be faced with a new commission, so President Barroso will be in months way out. Herman Van Rompuy, also the President of the European Council, comes to the end of his term, I think in November this year sometime. Likewise, the European Parliament has its election year as well. So the names will change. Remember the one-liners for the institutions. Parliament, the voice of the people, could use for institutions. Council, voice of member states, where the member states are directly represented. Whereas the European Commission, well, we promote the common interest, but it's also really the engine room to get things done. We're asking about the vote a moment ago. Here, actually, within the Parliament, these are the actual membership votes according to various member states. And these then are subdivided into political blocks, which we're certainly not going to go into. It's like a national parliament. Council of Ministers, I think it's rapidly we've done this enough. But these are its responsibilities, decides the EU laws about its Parliament, and indeed has the common foreign and security policy together with the High Representative and Baroness Ashton. You've seen this already. That's the top level beats. I don't know if the distinction has already been made between or understood between the European Council and the Council. So the level of the heads of state, which meets relatively infrequently, and the actual council, which meets pretty regularly, like possibly every month, inside Brussels. That's where the business of the council gets done at that level, and then we have the summits where all work is signed off. Yes, double hat of Captain Ashton. It sort of fits a bit uncomfortably. The European External Action Service, which I gather, I guess, Bruno will belong to, is sort of an odd beast. It's not, we don't call it an institution. Well, it used to come originally from a fusion between the Council, I think, and the Directorate General. But it's now looks after our delegations abroad.
In Australia, it's very easy these days. They just merge DFAT with OSAID. So it's just explain everything
nice.
to something.
I'll hold on to that. Now, the Commission, more relevant. That it sums up, these are our roles. If we propose the legislation, that's where the work gets done, from propositions. We have the role of guardian of the treaties, and this is a bit sort of hard to understand, we sometimes represent the EU on the international stage, as mentioned at the G20. President Barroso will normally be present. On the other hand, President Van Rompuy of the Council will be present in other instances, separately altogether. Its role is a bit confused. It's a topic of discussion. Now, this one, looking inside the EU, inside the Commission in particular, could usually start off by asking the question, how many people do you think are working in the European Commission? Which the usual answer is, I hope at least half. But I didn't, I went straight into numbers, so now you can see. It's not actually a massive bureaucracy in Brussels. That's, I think, one message I'd like to get across. Maybe you can take that too. These 34,000 or so people working for the Commission are about the size of the Department of Agriculture in Portugal, for instance, and I believe it's smaller than the City Administration of Sydney. So this organisation has to look after all policy areas of the European Union. So as a result, we are a very, very small number working on each policy line. And something to bear in mind, which you have, it's probably good to note this. We are under extreme pressure because of the economic crisis to reduce staff within the European Commission, other institutions as well. This is a sort of solidarity exercise, but it's nonetheless very, very strongly promoted. So each year of those years, we have to lose 1% of our staff, and yet the responsibilities increase. So it's a tough old world. This is a summary flow of how we make laws, but I'm not going to, I think time doesn't permit to go into details on this. So I'll just simply show that the various institutions interact. The Commission making a formal proposal, for instance, driven by either citizens groups. You can have it's possible for citizens to directly request the construction of the law. And Parliament and Council of Ministers jointly decide, and I'll go into that in a second, by a number of procedures which are well defined, but one of them in particular is, I'll show you in a moment, track writing. And once decided, it's over to the national or local authorities to implement by means of these directives, regulations, decisions. And then, of course, there's a vast amount of monitoring and implementation in order to follow up. Going into detail. Don't even look at this more than just to notice this is the co-decision procedure. It's the most common mechanism used for arbitrating between the various institutions. Important point is you've got the Commission involved, you've got the Parliament involved, you've got the Council involved, and this shows the flow of activity between these And it's quite, this is in fact simplified, it's much more complicated in practice. So if you want to frighten kids, then show them that. Now, moving, I'm trying to get close to where I've come from now, which is in one of the policy areas of the EU. The Europe 2020 strategy, I won't go into the rest, most of it, other than to say it has these dimensions: smart growth, sustainable growth, inclusive growth, good economic governance. It sounds good. This is the way we're trying to dig ourselves out of the troubles we're in. But the important point is that the smart growth in particular, we want to invest in education and producing a skilled workforce to help meet the requirements of the future. And here they are indeed, targets spelled out. Education, I'm just going to focus on this one because the rest are people you can find out elsewhere. I'll show you that. But education, we observe there is a problem with school dropout rates, and we also notice that we'd like to aim for 40% of this age range to complete third level tertiary education. Reason being that a number of studies show we need this nature of skilled workforce in Europe. There is a gap, a deficit between the jobs that are available and the people who are skilled enough to fulfill them, despite the very high levels of unemployment. So one of the vehicles we have for this, and you've heard reference already to Erasmus. Many of you may have actually used the Erasmus program itself. That's just the specific mobility program for students. And there's a variety of other similar programs, mainly with an element of mobility around them, either for vocational training or at school level, or particularly for youth. There's a lot of youth action initiatives now, mainly around mobility, but also stimulating volunteering. Now that's all finished, because it's, although all projects which have been launched under this program continue for another year or two, as of 1st of January this year, we now have the Erasmus Plus program. And I think the key message there is the budget's gone up 40%, and it's actually budgeted for the 7-year period, what we call multi-annual financial framework, which is from 2014 to 2020. There's a total of 14.7 billion. That's a sizable sum to do things. How do we do things? This is, since you've got, I'm trying to get to the inside, this is deep inside the Commission. This is actually the organigram of the Directorate-General where I work. Since we talk about the Commission as being a block, in fact it's subdivided into a number of policy-specific Directorates-General, in fact 33 at last count, with about 11 specialized officers on the side. This organogram is the total, it's the management organogram of education and culture, and it shows the various different directorates concerned with policy objectives and policy areas in education and culture. Can't see it, I know from there, but if you, maybe in the slides you might find it useful to refer to. I actually fit in here, in this directorate here, which is responsible for youth and sport. That's okay, I'm getting a 5-minute warning now, so it's just fine. It's maybe useful, I think I mentioned youth and sport. That is a new item, I don't think it's apparent in the earlier slide, but sport is now a new policy dimension in the education framework of Erasmus+. Money is being invested into stimulating sport activity around the Union, and various other cross-cutting issues such as anti-doping, match fixing, and similar things, sport in nature. So that's maybe that makes some sense. What's it like working day to day in the Commission? This is where I'm coming to my conclusion. I just sat down and thought, what is it we do in our offices every day? And these are mainly the things. We start from a couple of these. It sounds a bit bureaucratic to say that. We have a management plan, which is derived from the Commission work plan. Basically, it says it's top down inside the Commission. You are given a set every year, a set of rather high-level policy objectives from which you take the ones that refer to your own areas of policy, in this case education and culture, and you derive a set of specific initiatives and actions which conform to these high-level objectives. You try to work out in your teams legislative and practical initiatives. And in the case of our area, education and culture, we have a lot of grant-focused activity. That means we give out money. So you have to formulate calls for grant proposals. Then, I want to just point this out. There's a lot of very much control and monitoring that goes around everything we do. You have to prepare impact assessment before doing anything. So you have to really consider what you're doing and whether it will have the effect required and what other side effects it might have. A lot about risk management. This really is a large amount of work. It's assessing where things could go wrong, and then preparing and actually responding to requests for audits. We're very heavily an audit-based culture because of the criticisms addressed towards the organisation that spends public money. Then how we go about work. A lot of talking, as I think you can imagine, inter-service groups, and public consultations with the public at large. And these may result in a lot of briefings going upwards in our decision process, briefing senior management and the commissioner for each policy area. We have one commissioner for education and culture. This is Madame Andrula Vassiliou, the Cypriot commissioner. And largely we are feeding her needs to go and present and defend our initiatives in front of the commission. Then we get the decisions from management and basically implement them. And then in our spare time, try to think strategically. That brings me to the conclusion. I've just, on the last slide, I've put up a few what I hope are useful links, or could be useful. You'll find a lot of information on the Europa main site, and that is a general way in. It's quite general, so you have to dig deep to find something specific. And actually, if you want numbers, graphs, and things, I found the Eurostat site, which has a lot of authoritative figures and statistics for Europe. It's very helpful. Not what you read in the papers, which sort of educated facts. And then specifically for the Erasmus Plus program, you might want to check out this. We have a special site coming up. It's work in progress because it's only about a month old. But in the course of the next month or two or three, there will be a lot of information about Erasmus Plus. Also, and this I think could be of value to a lot of your students. The European Youth Portal, which is an initiative that's under development, it is currently consultable, and it has a lot of initiatives about finding jobs, arranging exchanges, setting up volunteering schemes for youth, and youth being secondary kids up to tertiary education students as well. There we go. I think that's better.